how to teach deaf people and deaf students. Prior to Alexander Graham Bell meddling in ASL, ASL was on its way. It was getting bigger. The culture, deaf culture was growing. There were deaf clubs and deaf events and deaf schools popping up everywhere. Well, Alexander Graham Bell had a lot of influence politically, socially, had a lot of influence. And he was of the mind that ASL was not a true language. ASL caused kids to not learn as quickly and not learn efficiently, caused them to not speak. If they were taught ASL when they were younger, it means they would never learn to speak. Through his influence, he pushed ASL back like 70 years. When I say that ASL was recently recognized as a language in like the 70s, it's because of him. It's absolutely because of him. He's shunned in the deaf community, Alexander Graham Bell, that name. And not saying, now oralism means you read lips and you speak. And these kids were suddenly, in deaf schools, they were suddenly, all the education system, education districts and boards or whatever were like, you know what, he's right. All this research, he's right. We don't need to be teaching ASL. Suddenly, deaf kids' hands were tied behind their back so they wouldn't sign. They were slapped on their hand if they ever tried to sign. They were put under their legs. If they were caught signing, they were punished, basically, because, again, the hearing majority thought we know best, and ASL is not a way to teach deaf children. So oralism, this is a sign oralism, means you read lips, you're taught to read lips, and you maybe use some sign, but mostly you speak, you're taught to speak. So,
how do they teach a deaf person to speak?
Speech pathologists or speech therapists, many, I can't even get into it because I don't even know. These therapists and pathologists are taught, they have masters and doctorate degrees, and they don't just teach deaf children, by the way. They all speech impediments, cleft palate, language delayed, but a multitude of ways. They take the deaf student's hand and they put their hand under to feel the vibration, using lip movements, using these like items and toys and the beat of something. A mirror, they'll use a mirror so they can see what the font is in the mirror. Like, you can't hear most definitely. If you have significant loss, it doesn't make a sound, so all you see is. So you have to kind of teach what, like, feel the air. I'm not really sure. I've just seen it done. But statistically now, deaf people are the most successful when they're taught by a multitude of both. To speak, to get by if they need to, and teaching ASL, absolutely. Doesn't even have to be in a deaf school, and all deaf school does not have to be. But he's a bad name in ASL. He wrote these articles and did all this research on how ASL is only should be learned somewhat to teach a deaf student, but that their primary mode of communication should be speaking and reading lips. So he took the deaf community back quite a bit. A lot of people don't know that. People just think he's just the creator. And the Alexander Graham Bell Association is a great organization, great association for people who need it. If you don't have a significant loss, and if the doctors deem that you could learn to speak pretty good, and you won't need to use ASL, then by all means, use oralism. Be an oralist. But it's not for everyone. He wanted all of America suddenly was oralism, oralism, oralism.
And it all stems back to what society believes more.
Right, exactly. Visible speech, he created what's called like cued speech, again creating his own language. Like this is the sign, I don't know cued speech. Ing, it's like taught, it's not a language, but he created a visible speech, cued speech.
basically German.
Yeah.
So,
Telephone away.
He wasn't really part of the deaf community or deaf people in general.
huh?
Turn your phone away and see how many there is.
Oh, honey, this phone ain't funny.
He thought that deaf people weaken society. He didn't believe that a deaf person should marry another deaf person because you're only like muddying the blood further, muddying the gene pool further.
Oh, nice.
Because before then, people thought that two deaf people made one deaf person, but he honestly believed that two deaf people should not marry. Absolutely not.
Now it'd be like your great marriage, because then they already know ASL.
Yeah. Yeah, normally. And hearing people marry deaf people marry people. But traditionally, but deaf people hearing people. The numbers of deaf people in America and how they were increasing really worried him.
What about the whole population and stuff?
I've read a memoir upon the formation of deaf society of the human race, preventing the birth of deaf children
Nice.
by basically
Sterilization.
stopping deaf people from marrying each other.
All kinds of stuff like that throughout history.
He said these three things were awful: the tendency of deaf people to marry other deaf people, the numbers of deaf people marrying other deaf people increased. You need to stop it, basically. All of these reasons, he said, were the reasoning that deaf people were suddenly, the increase of deafness in society was growing was because residential schools for the deaf, deaf associations and organizations, basically because deaf people were getting their own identity and community, it's increasing the deaf population. No, they're just coming out of hiding because they're not just stuck in their house anymore because their family's ashamed of them being deaf. They're being educated. It's got nothing to do with all of these springing up. But these springing up are the reason that deaf people are becoming educated. Forbid them from intermarrying. Eliminate residential schools, prohibit sign language use in deaf education, and forbid deaf teachers from teaching deaf students. So before that, many deaf teachers, that's when deaf people graduated, a lot of them became teachers, naturally. Teachers in deaf schools. Suddenly there were no deaf teachers were ever hired. Not saying ever, it can't be proven ever, but suddenly, again, that hearing oppression, hearing people are the best to teach deaf people. Even today, FSDB has tons of hearing teachers, which that's not a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it's almost like, who else is going to really understand me but another deaf person? Make sense? Yeah, so that's about it. And on that note, this last slide here, I promise it's the last one.
What's the sign for life?
Not lying, extending. I'll show her how to type this. Basically, you know how I talk about when you go to deaf events, how you might be sat at a table and no one will talk to you, or you'll have some nice people that are trying to talk to you. And when it comes to this culture, we'll be accepted to a certain point being hearing, but we will never know what it's like to be deaf. Just like men never know what it's like to be women, and vice versa. And a white person can never know what it's like to be black. A black person can never know what it's like to be Spanish. Make sense? So you just have to kind of keep that in mind. We will never know what it's. We can learn ASL and completely immerse ourselves, become interpreters, suddenly have tons of deaf friends, and we become great with ASL, and we immerse ourselves in deaf culture, but we will never know what it's like to be deaf. So just on that note, there's a slide on here somewhere. But that's it for tonight. Unless anyone has any other questions or comments.